Alright y'all, this ain't no tour bus ride. It's a foot-stomping, ghost-hunting, beignet-dusted stroll through the French Quarter. Bars, jazz, voodoo, motorcycles, and all. From Decatur to Rampart, we're hitting pirate hangouts, haunted hotels, and streets where history ain't dead. It's just drinking a Sazerac, wait for you to show up. Before it was Decatur Street, it was Levee Street. Just a muddy strip hugging the river, stacked with barrels, busy with boats, and rowdy as hell. It was New Orleans' front porch, and business, it got done right there in the thick of all the chaos. Then, in 1870, the city renamed it after Stephen Decatur, a Navy hero who had once said, "My country, right or wrong," and backed it up by blowing up pirate ships and going toe-to-toe with North African corsairs. Stephen Decatur never set foot in New Orleans, but they slapped his name on the street anyway. That's just how we do things down here. Right on the cross street of Decatur and Canal, where the French Quarter gives way to skyscrapers and streetcars, sits this big old granite monster called the old U.S. Custom House. And let me tell you, it's got more layers than a crawfish boil with a conspiracy theory on the side. They started building this thing back in 1848, back when New Orleans was printing money off cotton, sugar, and everything you could stuff on a steamboat. The feds, they wanted a grand fireproof temple to paperwork and tariffs, so they shipped in granite blocks from up north, because nothing says great idea like stacking 100,000 tons of rock on a damn swamp. Surprise, surprise, the thing kept sinking into the mud like a drunk uncle at Jazz Fest. Took them nearly 30 freaking years to finish it, partly because they changed architects more than Bourbon Street changes bars, and also because the Civil War came knocking. The Confederates squatted in it for a hot minute before the Union troops showed up and turned it into a Yankee hotel/jailhouse. They had soldiers, prisoners, federal judges, all living under one giant granite roof. It was less office building and more Game of Thrones Gulf Coastal edition. Inside is the famous Marble Hall, which looks like Zeus hired a wedding planner. Vaulted ceilings, iron balconies, marble floors so shiny you'll see your hangover staring back at you. It's one of the prettiest federal rooms in the whole dang country, and that's saying something. Over the years, it has housed custom officers, IRS agents, postmen, even butterflies. Seriously, this was home to the insectarium for a while. And when Katrina came through, this old stone beast just gritted its teeth and stood tall while the rest of the city got knocked sideways. Today, it's still there, chunky, historic, and dead serious, like a grumpy grandpa with a pocket full of receipts and war stories. Ain't just a building, y'all. It's a monument to bureaucracy, bad planning, and the stubborn glory that is New Orleans. Alright y'all, 419 Decatur Street. This ain't just where you grab a map and hear a ranger talk about jazz. This place has roots, deep in New Orleans history, and sugar. Built around 1882 for the James Reese Cracker Confectionery Company, it used to pump out sweet treats and saltines like nobody's business. Back then, Decatur was all riverfront hustle, and this two-story brick beauty was part of the Gilded Age push to turn New Orleans into a southern industrial hotspot. Picture molasses and flour in the air, barrels rolling in from the docks, and a crew baking their way to fortune. Now, it's the French Quarter Visitor Center, part of the Jean Lafitte National Historic Park and Preserve. Inside, you get stories of colonists, Creole, swamps, soul food, streetcars, all the spicy layers that is New Orleans. They even got jazz bands and history talks that'll knock your beignets off. So next time you're heading down Decatur toward Café de Monde, swing by here. You'll come in for the air conditioning, but leave with a belly full of bayou and maybe a story or two. Alright, buckle up and grab a beignet, because we're about to talk about a little slice of riverfront real estate that's seen more action than a Bourbon Street bouncer on Mardi Gras weekend, the Tuloo Street Warf. Now, this humble stretch of dock at the end of Tuloo Street doesn't look like much at first glance. Just wood, water, and maybe a steamboat tooting somewhere in the background. But let me tell you, this sucker's been the front porch of New Orleans for dang near 2 centuries. Way back when, this wharf was part of the gritty working waterfront, where stevedores, flatboatmen, and the occasional pirate were all sweating it out, unloading cotton, sugar, and barrels of God knows what under that unforgiving Louisiana sun. Back in the 1800s, this was the Wild West with humidity. Flatboats would come drifting down from the Ohio River, loaded with whiskey and frontier hopes, and dock right here. The men riding those boats, called Kentucks, were a rowdy bunch. They'd tie off at the wharf, stumble in the French Quarter looking for cheap drinks and cheaper company, then sell their boat for lumber and hope they remembered their name by morning time. And guess what? During the Civil War, this wharf became prime real estate for Union occupational forces once they rode into town in 1862. Supplies, troops, cannons, coffee. If it floated, it docked right here. By the late 19th and early 20th century, it was still popping, part of the industrial rhythm that kept the Crescent City humming. Fast forward to the 1970s, and folks finally realized, hey, maybe we should stop treating this historic riverfront like an abandoned work boot. So they cleaned it up, spruced it up, and turned it into the part of the moonwalk, that breezy path along the Mississippi where you can sip a daiquiri, watch a steamboat puff by, and feel real dang poetic. These days, the Tuloo Street Wharf is where the steamboat Natchez ties up, blasting old-timey calliope music, while tourists get a riverfront history lesson with a side of jambalaya. But underneath the jazz and Instagram filters, those old bones remain. Flatboats, cannon smoke, bootleggers, and all. The river keeps flowing, but Tuloo Street Wharf, that sucker stays rooted in New Orleans grit and gumbo glory. Alright, pull up a stool and crack a cold one, because I'm going to tell y'all about a place that used to pour dreams by the barrel. Jackson Brewing Company, aka Jack's Beer, aka the sudsy soul of New Orleans for dang near a century. Back in 1891, before air conditioning, decent sidewalks, or a single drunk tourist ever hollered, "Who dat?" Some enterprising, beer-loving German said, "You know what this yellow fever-infested swamp needs? A brewery the size of a Bavarian castle." And son, they built it. Right there at 600 Decatur Street, in the shadow of St. Louis Cathedral, and smack dab in the French Quarter. Jackson Brewery rose up like a beer temple, brick by brick, steepled and proud, slinging cold ones before refrigeration was even a thing people had figured out. And it wasn't no mom and pop corner bar operation either. By the 1920s, they weren't just a local name. They were the 5th largest brewery in the country that wasn't owned by some corporate overlord. Hell, they were bottling so much Jack beer, it might as well have been on tap in heaven. If you were drinking a cold one anywhere in the South between World War I and disco, chances are it had a big old red Jack's on the label. Then came Prohibition, America's 13-year dry spell, a bad decision and worse. And where most breweries folded like lawn chairs at a tailgate, Jack's just went, alright then, guess we're a soda company now. They started pumping out soft drinks to keep the lights on and the payroll running. Probably tasted like sadness and missed opportunity, but damn it, they survived. And when the dry times were over and some sneaky brewery in Jacksonville tried to swipe the Jack's name, these New Orleans boys said, no, not today. and sued their asses all the way up to the Supreme Court, and won. That's right, this wasn't just beer, it was identity. You mess with Jack's, you mess with New Orleans pride. But like all good Southern stories, this one has a bittersweet ending. By the late 1970s, the beer biz got all big and bloated with corporate mergers and light beer nonsense, and Jack's couldn't keep up. The brewery shut its taps in 1974, and the smell of malt and hops got replaced by retail shops and condos. But if you stand on Decatur Street today, squint a little, and breathe real deep, you can still feel it. The ghost of brewers in sweat-stained shirts, bottles clinking down the line, the heavy aroma of yeast and ambition in the air. The bones of that building remembers every keg, every quart fight, every damn soda bottle they had to pretend they liked. Jackson Brewery ain't just part of New Orleans history, it is New Orleans history. A little scrappy, a little sunburned, and built to outlast the storm. Now, picture this. It's the afternoon of December 23rd, 1814, and old Hickory himself, General Andrew freaking Jackson, hears that the Redcoats have landed and were gathering their forces on the grounds of the Villeray Plantation, less than 10 miles down the river from New Orleans. Now, did Jackson sit around sipping chicory coffee and talking strategy? Hell no. That man launched into action like somebody just kicked his favorite coon dog. He wrangled up his ragtag army right here on the old Palace des Armes, what we now call Jackson Square, and said, "Boys, grab your guns, we're going downriver." Then they high-stepped it down Latroe Street, which back then was basically a dirt road, riding shotgun with the Mississippi, turned onto the river road, and headed straight to Chalamet like a musket ball with a mission. And what happens next? Jackson hits the British with the dang haymaker, a savage night attack that lit up the sugarcane fields and made the British think twice about their whole invasion plan. It wasn't just a brawl, it was a message. This ain't your colony, buddy. That sneak attack didn't end the fight, but it sure as hell threw a monkey wrench in the king's plans and set the stage for the grand finale. The Battle of New Orleans on January 8, 1815, where Jackson and his Bayou boys sent those redcoats packing so hard they probably still flinch every time they hear a fiddle. God bless grit, gumbo, and Andrew Jackson's "I wish a Brit would" energy. So it's 1862, right in the middle of the Civil War, and New Orleans has just been snatched out of the Confederates' hands by the Union Navy. Jackson Square has become a drill ground for Union troops and a symbol of federal control. Once a lively Creole plaza, it now stands under the watch of soldiers and the stern gaze of Andrew Jackson's statue, as flags change and the city adjusts to federal occupation. But right across from all that drama in Jackson Square, somebody has had the brilliant idea to open a coffee stand. Enter Cafe du Monde, born right in the middle of that mess like a powdered sugar phoenix rising from the ashes of the chaos. Because of the federal blockade, supplies in the city have been tighter than a tick on a hound dog. So the Creoles in the quarter, they have gotten crafty and started mixing in chicory with the coffee to stretch it out. Turns out, it gives the brew this bold, earthy punch that'll slap you awake faster than a Union cannonball. And don't forget about the beignets, y'all. Basically, French donuts that took one look at powdered sugar and said, "Hell yeah, more." These things come out of the grease hotter than the bayou in August and get buried under a blizzard of sweetness so heavy it'll make your dentist sweat. Union soldiers, fresh off drilling in Jackson Square, would wander over, still smelling like gunpowder and blue wool, just trying to get a hot cup and a bite of joy in a world gone completely sideways. And let me tell you, that combo of caffeine, fried dough, and sugar shock probably improved morale more than any general ever did. So yeah, Café du Monde didn't just survive a war, it started in one. And it's been serving up soul-soothing goodness ever since. This place ain't just a coffee shop. It's a battle-hardened New Orleans institution with powdered sugar on its boots and chicory in its veins. 912 Decatur Street, the Dutch Alley Artists Co-op. Now here's a spot that used to be about as lively as a busted air conditioner in August. Just another chunk of warehouse row, back when this part of town was more about hauling crates than creating culture. But these days, buddy, it's a whole different story. They turned that dusty old storage space into a straight up shrine to local talent. Inside Dutch Alley Artists Co-op, you'll find painters, sculptors, jewelry makers, all homegrown, all hustling, all making stuff that screams New Orleans louder than a Mardi Gras Grand Marshal on a sugar high. Every brushstroke, every bead, every carved hunk of driftwood tells a story of swamp heat and soul. And if you're lucky, you'll catch a trumpet player or washboard wizard posting up outside, laying down some street music that makes the whole block feel alive. Just, not in the hot dog days of summer. This ain't just a gallery, it's a front row seat to what happens when creativity does the funky butt. Alright, y'all, picture this. It's 1906 in the French Quarter. Horses are clopping, fish markets are reeking, and in strolls a Sicilian immigrant named Salvador Lupo, fresh out of Palermo, with more grit than a cast iron skillet. He sets up shop right there on Decatur Street, and before long, he don't just run a grocery, he bursts a legend. Central Grocery becomes ground zero for one of the baddest sandwiches ever slapped together, the muffuletta. Now, Salvador wasn't trying to be fancy. He saw them dock workers and farmers juggling cheese, cold cuts, and jars of olive salad like they were doing a damn grocery juggling act. So he said, screw it, let's stack all that on a giant sesame loaf and call it lunch. And just like that, ham, salami, mortadella, provolone, Swiss, and olive salad met their destiny in a sandwich big enough to knock out a hangover or a small child. That man ran that place like a boss until 1946, when he handed the reins to his son-in-law, Frank Tuloo. But Salvatore's spirit stayed in the bricks and in the bread. Central Grocery became more than just a deli. It's a pilgrimage site. Folks from all over the country come to pay their respects in the form of carb loading. It's been on PBS, The Today Show, USA Today. Hell, at this point that muffuletta ought to have its own zip code. Even when Hurricane Ida tried to shut it down in 2021, ripping the place up something fierce, the family rebuilt. Took them a while, but by December 2024, the doors were open and the smell of olive salad was floating through the quarter like incense in a church. So yeah, Salvador Lupo didn't just invent a sandwich. He laid the greasy, delicious cornerstone of a New Orleans institution. That muffuletta, it ain't just food, it's history with a heartbeat and a whole lot of olive salad. Alright y'all, let's talk about Joni on the pony, New Orleans' favorite golden girl who looks like she's about to gallop straight into a Saints game and call a blitz. She's sitting there all armored up on Decatur, watching folks sip their coffee and dodge traffic, like a holy linebacker with a French accent. Now, the real-life Joan of Art? She was never in Louisiana, and she didn't exactly ride down Bourbon Street swinging a sword. But she is the Maid of Orleans, and since New Orleans is named after the Duke of Orleans, well, that's how she got the gig. It tracks. Back in the 60s, France boxed her up and shipped her own over as a shiny little thank you for the memories gift. She sat in storage for a bit, like most things in this town, all too true. She finally got planted near the river gate. Then in '99, they scooted her on over to the French market, and she's been holding court ever since, glinting in the sun like a dang gold nugget with an attitude. But here's the kicker. She's not just some statue for folks to take selfies with. Joan's a symbol of grit, rebellion, and telling the powers that be to kiss your armored ass. She's famous for leading French troops into battle and lifting the siege of Orleans in 1429, all while claiming God was in her corner. England called her a witch, lit the match, and burned her at the age of 19. But joke's on them, because 25 years later, the church was like, whoops, cleared her name, and by the 1920s, she was a full-on saint, patron of France, soldiers, and anyone who has ever been told to sit down and smile while standing taller. Now, just to clear things up, Joan might be the Big Easy's mascot, but she's not the official saint of New Orleans. That would be Drew Brees. Actually, the honor goes to Our Lady of Prompt Security, who, according to legend, came in clutch during the Great Fire of 1812 and the Battle of New Orleans in 1815. Folks prayed, and she delivered, hence the prompt part of the name. She's the one you holler at when hurricanes show up or your gumbo won't thicken. So yeah, Joan of Art may not be our patron saint, but she's our honorary queen of badassery. Shiny, stubborn, and sitting tall in the quarter like she owns the place. And honestly, we wouldn't have it any other way. Alright, y'all. Let's pour one out for Benjamin Latroe, the guy who tried to civilize New Orleans before it ever wanted to be civilized. Our boy showed up with Enlightenment ideals, blueprints, and the kind of can-do attitude you usually only see in freshman senators or in golden retrievers. And what did the city give him in return? A muggy death sentence and a park the size of a Waffle House parking lot. But don't let the size fool you. Latroe Park may be small, but it sits on a big damn story. Before he ever set foot in the Crescent City, Latrobe had already been tearing it up in the world of architecture and infrastructure. Born in 1764 in Full Neck, England, to a Moravian preacher and a mom who believed in education. A rare combination, right? He studied in Germany and toured Europe like a one-man Renaissance roadshow. He soaked up every bit of classical design, hydraulics, and big-picture thinking you could cram into one powdered wig head. By 1796, he was done with British bureaucracy and sailed for America, chasing dreams and maybe a little peace and quiet. He didn't get either. Instead, he made his mark designing the Bank of Philadelphia, the first Greek Revival building in the United States, and earned a reputation as a genius with a T-square. President Thomas Jefferson thought so too, putting him in charge of building the U.S. Capitol and the interior of the White House. That's right, before he ever laid eyes on Bourbon Street, Latrobe was literally shaping America's front porch. He wasn't just a pretty blueprint either. Latrobe believed cities needed more fancy facades. They needed clean water, sewers, and systems that didn't give folks dysentery every other Tuesday. He built the Philadelphia Waterworks, one of the most advanced water systems of its time. The man was out here trying to tame chaos with plumbing. Then came the decline, thanks to politics, money trouble, and a little old thing called the War of 1812. Latrobe's star started to dim. So in 1818, with his reputation a little dented, but his spirit intact, he packed up his compass and drafting tools and headed to New Orleans, where the river was muddy, the air was thick enough to chew, and people were dying of yellow fever like it was a hobby. His mission? Bring clean, pressurized water to a city that had all the charm of a bourbon-soaked fever dream, but none of the infrastructure. Folks were drinking and dumping into the same river. So Latrobe designed a steam-powered waterworks, cisterns, canals, pumps, the whole steamy shebang. It was ambitious as hell, and smarter than just about anything else in the Gulf South at the time. But New Orleans ain't exactly gentle to dreamers. The machinery sputtered, the river water stayed dirty, and yellow fever didn't give a damn about Enlightenment thinking. First, it took his son. Then it came for him. He died in a rented room on Royal Street in 1820, just before his waterworks officially opened. The city kept it running, barely, until it finally gave up on the whole thing in 1836. Turns out, clean water's a tough sell when everyone's used to just adding whiskey and praying. Still, his vision didn't die in vain. The bones of that system led to better ones. He helped start the long, messy journey toward modern public health. And while the waterworks collapsed, Latroe Park rose up in its place. Built in 1976, it's a quiet, leafy little patch near the French Market. You won't find brass bands or tour groups, but you will find benches under palms, a Wallace fountain dripping cool water like a French apology, and that thick, haunted hush that settles where history once gasped its last breath. So next time you're downriver and need a break from the quarter chaos, swing by Latrobe's Park, sit yourself down, sip your drink, and give a nod to the man who tried to clean up New Orleans and paid for it with his life. Latroe may not have beaten the swamp, few have, but he damn sure tried to drain it. Alright y'all, let me tell you about the French Market. That funky old sprawl of stalls and smells down by the river actually got its start. Spoiler alert, it wasn't French, and it sure as hell wasn't built for beignets and t-shirts. Nope, the OG version of the market was put together by the Spanish back in the late 1700s, and it wasn't about trinkets or tourist snacks. It was a straight-up meat market designed to keep this wild-ass colonial town from descending into full-on frontier chaos. Picture a butcher's row with a tropical fever dream twist. So, here's what went down. After Spain took over Louisiana from France in 1763, they looked around New Orleans and basically said, "Y'all can't keep selling goat meat off a wheelbarrow in the street." The French had been running this loosey-goosey open-air trading post where folks were selling chickens, catfish, gator parts, you name it, right off the mud. No ice, no rules, no sanitation, just vibes and bacteria. So the Spanish, who were way more into rules and regulations than the laissez-faire Creoles, decided they'd build a real damn market. That's how the meat market, the foundation of today's French market, got started. Around 1791, they slapped up a covered arcade market made of brick and tile right near the levee, where the breeze maybe could keep the funk from knocking people out cold. Why covered? Because even the Spanish knew that raw beef in a New Orleans summer needed at least some shade, unless you were trying to invent cholera. The cover also let them keep rain off the goods, reduced spoilage, and exercised a little control, because nothing says civilized society like a roof and a list of rules. And boy, did they bring the rules. Spain set up strict regulations on what you could sell, where you could sell it, and how clean your operation had to be, which, for the 1790s standards, meant maybe wiping the blood off your table once in a while. You needed a license to operate a stall, and inspectors were supposed to keep vendors from selling rotten meat, shorting customers, or price gouging like it was Bourbon Street on Mardi Gras. The market even had designated areas for different products: meat, fish, vegetables, dairy, so you didn't have to smell the pig poo while you picked out your groceries. Now, where did all that beef and pork come from? The Spanish didn't just pop down to Rouse's. They brought cattle up from the prairies and the bayous, particularly from the Atacapes and Appaloosa regions, where French Creole ranchers and enslaved Africans were raising Longhorn-style Spanish cattle. These herds were driven down to the city, often through a mix of indigenous trails and colonial roads, arriving just in time to meet a butcher with a sharp blade and a strong stomach. Who was working in the market? A big mix of folks, actually. Butchers were often free men of color, skilled tradesmen who knew how to break down a carcass in record time and do it with style. Women ran produce stalls, sold herbs, and slung everything from callos, which are fried rice cakes, to live chickens. And of course, the enslaved people, they did the back-breaking work of hauling, cleaning, and the labor behind the scenes, laying down the real foundations of what kept the market moving. This was a working-class melting pot that smelled like blood, brine, and ambition. So next time you're nibbling on a poor boy near Cafe du Monde or shopping for hot sauce in a tourist trap, just remember this whole stretch started as a Spanish-run, blood-soaked butchery designed to tame the wild trade of colonial New Orleans. It was hot, it was loud, and it was regulated as hell, and it laid the bones, literally, for the French market we know today. Let me tell you about a spot that's slinging wood-fired pizza today, but used to sling sin, sweat, and sorrow like it was happy hour in hell. Right there on the corner of Decatur and Barracks, where the Louisiana Pizza Kitchen keeps the ovens hot and the Cabernet flowing, sits a mid-1800s Creole townhouse that has seen some things. And I ain't talking about burnt crust. Back in the day, this whole stretch was called Gallatin Street. And let me tell you, it made Bourbon Street look like choir practice. From the 1840s through the start of the Civil War, Gallatin was the absolute belly of the beast in antebellum New Orleans. It hugged the river like a drunk uncle and catered to every dark itch that came off them boats. Brothels, bars, gambling dens, opium joints, knife fights in the mud, you name it. Gallatin had it, and usually before noon. And right there in the middle of all that chaos stood this fine-looking brick and iron townhouse, built like it meant business, with fireproof masonry and cast-iron galleries tough enough to survive hurricanes and hangovers. The building was probably shuffled through the greasy hands of John Boyd Gilchrist, a slave trader who made his fortune peddling human lives before flipping on over to real estate. Then builder John DeYoung finished it up. Rooms on top, storefront on the bottom. The perfect layout for the vice trade. You could drink, gamble, or worse downstairs and pass out or get robbed upstairs. Now here's the part that it hits different. This wasn't just a party street. It was a holding zone for enslaved people, brought down the river and stuck in shacks and yards until someone came along to buy them. Folks partying in the quarter today may sip their beer on the patio and not realize the bricks under their feet remember screams. The place hums with it if you stop long enough to listen. By the 1930s, the city had had enough, bulldozed most of Gallatin, gave it a makeover, and renamed it the French Marketplace like a mom trying to hide her kid's juvie record. Then, in the 1980s, the pizza joint moved in, and now it's all thin crust and red wine. But the building is still standing, still whispering, still holding memories in its bones. Now, there's nothing wrong with raising a glass there. Just maybe raise one for the ones who didn't get to choose how they lived, or where. Alright, y'all. Before the U.S. Mint was minting coins or hosting jazz shows, that big brick box at the edge of the French Quarter was Fort St. Charles, and back in 1769, it was the backdrop for one hell of a reality check. See, the French Creoles in New Orleans thought they were slick. Spain had just taken over Louisiana, and they were not too thrilled about it. So, in 1768, they ran off the Spanish governor, Antonio de Ulloa, like a bunch of drunk uncles tossing a party crasher out the back door. They figured Spain wouldn't notice or care. But spoiler alert, Spain did, in fact, notice. in rode Alejandro Bloody O'Reilly, an Irish-born Spanish general who did not come to play. He showed up one morning with 2,000 Spanish troops, guns loaded, and powdered wigs immaculate. He looked around and said, "So, y'all thought y'all were going to stage a coup, and I wouldn't say nothing?" But he went full Game of Thrones. He arrested the ringleaders, held a military trial right there at the fort, and then lined up 5 of them in front of a wall and shot them by firing squad. No delay, no backtalk. Message delivered. These days, the fort is long gone, and the building's the old U.S. Mint, where they used to crank out silver coins, and now host jazz concerts and museum exhibits. But let me tell you, those bricks still hum with ghosts. You stand real still in the courtyard. You may just hear boots on cobblestone and feel the tension of a rebellion that got stomped out cold. And that's the full stretch of Decatur, from empire and invasion to powdered sugar and second line. Thank you for watching. If you're hungry for more of the strange and beautiful chaos that is the Gulf Coast, and if you haven't hit that subscription button yet, now's the time. Don't overthink it, just do it. Until next time, folks, this is Gulf Coastal Connections. Stay curious, stay hungry, and stay salty.